Hey everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood Dungeon Master here, Zach. I am bringing you a specific video about something I'm doing. It's a brand new thing that I've never done before. I haven't seen anybody else do it either. Doesn't mean that hasn't been done before. Sure it has. This is a hobby with literal decades of history, but I figured I hadn't seen this around, so I thought I'd show you. I'm running Pathfinder 2nd Edition for a brand new group of players. It's going to be the first time in over 2 years that I'm finally able to get people at my house, at my table, playing a game together. I'm super excited. They're all brand new to the hobby, but one of my biggest complaints about sometimes playing a tabletop RPG is when a player ends up creating a character that doesn't feel completely grounded in the world and the setting that we're playing in. So how do I solve that for people that have literally never played the hobby before and have no idea the game world is? And I don't expect them and shouldn't expect them to read a 10-page primer on the setting before they even start thinking about their character. Well, I'm solving it by pre-writing backstories that are directly tied into backgrounds for the Pathfinder 2e system. Let's talk about it. So I've gushed about the character creation process for Pathfinder 2e. I think it's fantastic and in the exact level of crunch and customizability, but balance across the board that I was looking for in a game once I kind of became a little frustrated with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And so I've been able to recruit 3 brand new players for a Pathfinder 2e one-shot that might eventually turn into a campaign, but all of them are completely new to the hobby. One person has played Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition once, and has listened to the Adventure Zone podcast, which, if you are aware of that podcast, know it's maybe not the best representation of actually playing a game system. Incredibly entertaining, but maybe not a great teacher of a game system and rules and etc. So I'm putting stuff together and trying to create a easy process that requires the minimal amount of buy-in required to play a one-shot, which is even smaller and less buy-in required to begin a campaign for the first time. So how do I, as the GM, get excited about the one-shot and the story and the characters that we're going to be interacting with and playing with, but how do I make sure that my players don't get overwhelmed and feel like they have to write an English paper and read a treatises on the history of a setting before they can create a fully grounded in-world character? Doing that by pre-writing several backstories that the players can look at and choose from. Included in each backstory is a recommended class or selection of classes, and either a custom background that I have built or adapted from a different setting guide, or a selection of backgrounds that are available in the general Pathfinder 2e rulebooks. I'm planning on playing this game in Tal'dorei, or Exandria, the setting of Critical Role created by Matthew Mercer for Critical Role. Obviously very popular, regardless of how you feel about Critical Role, the actual gameplay itself, the effect the show has had on the hobby itself. It's a great fantasy sync setting that I know pretty well. Compared to Galarian, which is Pathfinder's default setting, I'm really new to the system, and while I do have several of the Lost Omens guidebooks, they aren't exactly easy reading. Do wish Paizo would publish like ebook versions of the guidebooks, especially where they're not chock full of reference material. Something I just read on my Kindle would be incredible. Regardless, I'm using this setting because I know it. It excites me. They just published a new version or an updated version of the setting called Tal'dorei Reborn, which is the setting guide for one of the main continents on the world of Exandria from the first long campaign that Critical Role show did, the Vox Machina campaign. The campaign setting guide has moved the timeline about 25 years after the end of campaign 1 and sets up a lot of cool storylines that I think will be interesting to play in without having to necessarily worry about what the show is doing, get to create kind of my own canon for what a group of adventurers could be. Now, you might be saying, Zach, you're doing that GM thing where you're thinking big picture for what's supposed to be a 3 or 4 hour one-shot. You'd be right. Can't help myself. This is what I do. So regardless, I'm probably going to be using this material for a different game group if this group that I'm talking about specifically right now doesn't end up playing a lengthy campaign. This will be used. It's not a waste. I get joy out of doing it regardless, so we're all good. Back to our backstories. So what I wanted to do was create backstories that were grounded in the Tal'dorei setting, or at least made some kind of proper noun reference to give the character some kind of reference point that if we do play a longer campaign, I can kind of pull on some strings and create some relationships and really get the character involved in what's going on in the world. So I thought we would take a look at the actual backstories that I'm doing, just to give you a taste of what I've been working on for if you want to use for, you want to do this for maybe a new player or new players that are coming into your game to give them a leg up. Or if you have feedback for what I'm doing, if you think, hey, Zach, I don't know if this exactly does what you think it's going to do, or maybe here's a new something new you could add to it that would make it even better, totally welcome that. Leave your comments down in the description or in the comment section of this video. So let's take a look. So I've created, what is this, 8 Google Docs, each with a backstory. And let's look at one that I really like. Let's look at the Awol Gunslinger. This one is probably the most grounded in the setting because, I mean, really interesting history where the Critical Role home game, before they went on stream and became what we now know as Critical Role, it was a Pathfinder 1E game. And one of the one of the players, Taliesin Jaffe, was playing a gunslinger class character. And when the game moved to be on camera, they ended up changing from Pathfinder to D&D 5th edition because they thought it would be better for the viewers at home to be able to understand without as much legwork to get into the large Pathfinder D&D 3.5 setting. Probably hugely beneficial business decision for them, but can you imagine what the world might be like if Critical Role got to the same level of popularity, but they had been playing Paizo material instead of Wizard of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons material? Crazy what if timeline multiverse split. But regardless, so they moved from Pathfinder 1E to D&D 5th edition, but one of the characters was a class that literally just straight up did not exist in D&D 5th edition. So Matt Mercer and the player Taliesin kind of worked together, created a gunslinger subclass of the fighter class, but at the time, 5th edition was brand new to both Taliesin and Matt. This was Matt's first piece of big homebrew. He probably made it public and published it too early, and the class, or the subclass, really was crazy overpowered. Watch any of the late game Critical Role Campaign 1, and Percy, the gunslinger character, blow shit up with, you know, little remorse. But what's cool is that that actually kind of works for the story because Percy is actually the original and first, pretty much only gunslinger. He invented the use of firearms and black powder with bullets and flintlock pistols and eventually a 4-chambered pistol. It was very, very cool. But in the setting, that means that the firearm technology isn't widespread. It is kind of a very, essentially a state secret for the city of Whitestone and the Dorolo family. So in order to allow a character to play a gunslinger in the Tal'dorei setting, I wrote a backstory and created a similar but custom background that gives access to firearms, unlocks the gunslinger class. I would basically make the gunslinger class a rare class, not just uncommon or common. It would probably be a rare class where the GM would have to kind of allow it on a case-by-case basis. But here's just a short 3-paragraph little description. If you read it, you can see there's some proper nouns here. Born in Whitestone, Lord Briarwood, Percival Dorolo, Whitestone Rifle Corps. All these are general setting-specific information that grounds the character in a location, creates some previous history of at least themselves and their family. But if you take a better look, like, I didn't create any proper nouns about, I just said you're raised by a neighbor where they took care of your needs, your adoptive family. I even say your natural gifts and training aided you well. Military didn't get along. After several attempts, a specific event caused you to leave the Corps and Whitestone altogether. So letting the player themselves figure out what was the event. Was it even a negative one or a positive one? Could you go back to the city of Whitestone, or are you basically AWOL and potentially have a warrant out for your arrest? So there's a lot of flexibility here, but provides a lot of grounding and essentially like the framework for a pretty specific backstory that I think any GM would be happy to receive from a player and leading up to a session 1 for a campaign. And then at the bottom here, I've got suggested character options: class gunslinger, race, any humanoid with hands. I like, can they actually function a gun and a firearm? I honestly don't know enough about some of the uncommon and rare ancestries in Pathfinder to know if this would immediately like count any of them out. But for the most part, this really, I think I even drop, and actually this should be ancestry, shouldn't said race out of habit. You'll see that most of my other docs don't even list an ancestry because a backstory shouldn't really limit an ancestry, especially a generic one like the ones I'm trying to write. So then we have a background Whitestone Rifle Corps, and then here in this box I've got pretty much the custom background. That if you liked this backstory and you wanted to play a gunslinger, this would be the background that you would probably need in order to play that class and this character. So a little bit of a description, 2 ability boosts. 1 must be dexterity or intelligence. 1 is a free boost. Trained in the crafting skill and the engineering lore skill, you gain the quick repair skill feat. I'm pretty sure I stole this bit just straight up out of, like, this is basically adopted from one of the Guns and Gears gun-specific background. Like, I didn't really create any of this. Most of this is, some of this is straight up copy and pasted from the Tal'dorei Reborn campaign guide. Pretty sure this is the description of there's a Whitestone Rifle Corps background for 5th edition in the Tal'dorei Reborn campaign guide. So, but 1 page and 3 paragraphs. Another one that is a little more, even less specific to, well, it's kind of specific. This is actually one that, this is basically a generic or a more generic backstory of a character I've thought about for a long time, that I've had in my back pocket for years, that I've never played. The retired Gladiator. Earned your place in the history books of the Brawlers League, which is a setting-specific a group. What would you call it? A political group, or I'm drawing a blank on the actual term for it right now. But it's basically an illegal fighting competition that everybody turns a blind eye to because they're entertaining and make the, you know, make people money. You know, story as old as time. But you've run out of all the money that you earned from your winnings, and one thing I really like is the whole fighting from money thing is a young person's game, and that isn't you anymore. I really like the idea of a adventurer who is middle-aged, even a middle-aged human. I feel like a lot of people either go really old for a race that ages slowly, or play a young person because that's what makes sense, or just starting out in their life. But I kind of like the idea of someone maybe just turned 35, 40. They spent, you know, they spent 10 years doing something specific and then chilled out for a decade, and now they've got to earn money again, and so they're turning to the adventuring life. And the way I kind of see this character kind of playing out is the reason why they're level 1 is because they've done nothing very specific for years. You know, maybe they've gone around and gambled. Maybe if they want to get really specific, maybe they've kind of done like the convention circuit and like signed autographs and made money from being famous. But now all that has dried up for some reason, and so they've got to go be an adventurer again. They haven't worked out in a long time. They haven't actually fought in, you know, maybe a decade. And so I really like this idea that like the level 1 represents the fact that they're kind of going back to basics because they're really rusty, and gives kind of this cool, really built-in rich history for a character that has already lived a life and now has a chance at a new one, which I think is just really, really cool. Ancestry's this is generally what I had on all of my backstories, but obviously if you write something that's really specific to, like, for instance, I haven't written one that's specific to the elves of Singorn, but I could, and I would limit the ancestry to someone from elvish descent. I haven't written a backstory for someone who has crossed over into the material plane from the Feywild, but I could. That hasn't really been the type of character that I've thought about yet, but if you could absolutely do that. I picked the barbarian and fighter classes for this backstory that make the most sense, or you could potentially be a ruffian rogue. If you have a thought about, well, do you think they could be X? Possibly. And I think if a player was like, hey, I really like the retired gladiator backstory, but I really want to play a champion. Do you think I could do that? And I was like, yeah, let's figure out how we make that work, especially since there's this gap between being the gladiator, the famous winning gladiator, and the character you are now, the person you are now. A lot could have happened in the meantime. So this is pretty flexible. And then the gladiator background from I believe it's the adventure or the advanced player's guide, could just be from the core rulebook, works, or any background similar to your day job. So like if they were doing jobs after they retired, like if they were a barkeep, if they were a lawyer, if they were a bounty hunter, like use any of those backgrounds would be totally fine. Didn't feel the need to create a custom background here. Could potentially create one maybe similar to like the folk hero background for 5th edition. I haven't seen one that's like that in Pathfinder 2e, so that's probably one that I could see that if the player really wanted to lean into being famous, I might end up either incorporating that into the gladiator background or creating a fresh one, you know, and kind of piecemealing something from existing stuff. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to show y'all. Pre-made backstories. I just wrote these into Google Docs, put them in a single folder, and have shared them with my players. I think that works really well. You could do whatever you want. If you use something like World Anvil or some kind of other software, Notion is another popular one. Do what you do, but see my general structure, suggested character options. I think this lowers the bar of entry for a brand new player really, really well. And I think gives players a leg up in creating a character that hopefully the whole table feels is unique and what the player wanted to play, but is really grounded in the setting and still gives a lot of flexibility for the player themselves. I would call this halfway between a completely unique character where the player provides the backstory and a totally pre-made character like one included in the Pathfinder Beginner Box. So hope you enjoyed this. I have some other content, video content that I'm thinking about around running Pathfinder for brand new people. And so if you're interested in that type of content, maybe you're a game master like me who is thinking about running Pathfinder, but you only have people that have never played before and need some help, let me know and I can create some more specific content around that. Talk about some other things that I'm doing to get ready for my game, like how I'm ingesting the rules for Pathfinder again so that I'm comfortable playing the game, what kind of products I've bought from Paizo and other third-party providers to prep for the game, the music I'm getting ready for, my tech stack for running in person, because yes, I am that person that needs a tech stack for running in person. So let me know what you're interested in. And if you've got comments or feedback about my my pre-made backstories, let me know in the comments of this video. I want to hear them. And if you end up publishing any on your own for maybe your own setting or even for Galeria, let me know and shoot them to me. You can reach out to me on Twitter at @ZachHall_ or just find me here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. I will see you next time. Peace.